The city slept beneath a rain that seemed endless. At the St. Aurelius Medical Center, the storm pressed against the windows like a restless patient begging to come inside. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed steady, sterile, and uncaring. Dr. Elise Navarro had been awake for 22 hours. Her scrubs smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Her hands shook just enough to make her handwriting illegible on the chart, but she didn't stop. There was no stopping here. Not when lives depended on motion. Trauma Room 3 had just been cleared. A 17-year-old car crash. He made it. Barely. His mother didn't. Elise didn't have time to think about that part. She wiped the blood from her neck, changed gloves, and moved on. Navarro, a nurse, called. Someone just came in through psych intake brought by paramedics. Male, mid-30s. Aggressive, Elise exhaled slowly. Send him through to exam 4. I'll take it. Security's asking for backup. I said I'll take it. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. The psych intake hallway was quieter than usual. The rain muffled everything. She walked past the nurse's station, feeling the familiar chill of midnight, that strange hour when hospitals feel less like places of healing and more like machines that never sleep. She found him in exam 4. The patient sat on the gurney, drenched in rain, shivering. A paramedic stood by the door, filling out a form. He was found wandering on the highway, the medic said. Tried to bite one of the officers. We sedated him with 5 of haloperidol, but the man suddenly looked up. His eyes were wild, not with rage, but something deeper. Fear, recognition, something Elise couldn't name. She met his gaze. Sir, can you tell me your name? He stared, then smiled slow, uneven, like his mouth didn't quite remember how. His lips moved, but the sound came out like a groan. Do you remember me? Elise froze. Her heart tripped over itself. I don't think we've met, she said quietly. He tilted his head, eyes darting to the fluorescent light above them. The bulb flickered once, twice. He whispered, You left me there. Something in the room shifted, not physically, but perceptibly. The air felt charged, as if the walls themselves remembered something Elise didn't. Nurse, she said softly, not turning her head. Can you call psych consult? The nurse hesitated. Dr. Navarro, the patient's body jerked. Then he screamed, a raw animal sound that seemed to scrape the air. He grabbed the 4-pole beside him and swung. Glass shattered. The nurse screamed. The paramedic dove for cover. Elise didn't move fast enough. The pole caught her temple. Pain exploded like light. She fell backward, hitting the floor hard. Her ears rang with the echo of the crash. Through blurred vision, she saw his face above her, expressionless, detached. He whispered something, but the ringing drowned it out. Then a shadow moved. Security. The patient was pulled away. Yelling. Movement. Then, nothing. Elise blinked. The ceiling lights blurred into stars. The ringing became a hum, and for a long moment, there was no pain, only silence. When she opened her eyes again, the room was empty. No voices, no monitors, no sound. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, then burned steady. She tried to call out to ask for help. Her throat moved, but no sound came out. Not a whisper, not even a gasp, just silence. Elise tried again, and again. Nothing. Her body trembled. The edges of her vision dimmed. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed softly like a sigh. The rain outside had stopped, but inside the hospital, something else began. A nurse finally found her. The hallway flooded with motion lights, voices, confusion. Elise tried to focus on their mouths, but the words didn't reach her. Her world had turned to glass. She could see everything, but hear nothing. They lifted her onto a gurney. Needles, IVs, monitors, all the things she knew by heart. But in the middle of the noise, inside her head, there was still only silence. She drifted in and out of consciousness. Faces passed above her, familiar, blurred. One of them leaned close, shouting something. Her vision focused enough to see his badge. Aidan Price, MD Neurosurgery. He looked directly into her eyes. Dr. Navarro, can you hear me? She blinked. Once. Yes, she tried to say. but nothing came out. The world narrowed to a single sound, the beeping of her own heart monitor. Steady, relentless. She closed her eyes, and in the dark, beneath that pulse of machinery, she thought she heard something else, a whisper. Not from anyone in the room, not even from her own memory. You left me there. When Elise woke again, everything was white. White sheets, white walls, white light that burned even through her closed eyelids. For a moment, she thought she had died, but then came the hum, that faint vibration under the skin, the steady rhythm of machines. She wasn't dead. She was in a hospital bed, her own hospital. She turned her head slightly. The movement sent pain stabbing through her neck. Her pulse quickened. Monitors answered with muted flashes of green, but she didn't hear the beeping. No alarms, no footsteps, no voices. Just that strange, low vibration-like sound trying to reach her from a long way off. Her lips parted. Nothing came out, not even air. Her throat felt tight, dry, raw. She tried again, a whisper, a word, a sound, but there was only silence. It was like being trapped behind glass. She could see the world moving, but she couldn't touch it. Panic surged. She tore at the four in her arm, trying to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey. A blur of motion entered the room, figures rushing, hands pressing her shoulders, words forming that she couldn't hear. Her mind filled in the blanks. Calm down, you're safe, don't move. She couldn't tell if they were real or just the echoes of her own thoughts. Then a new face appeared. A man, his expression calm, controlled, his eyes sharp but tired. He leaned close enough for her to see the name on his badge, Aidan Price, and he mouthed something slowly, exaggerating each syllable. Do you know where you are? Elise blinked, once for yes. He nodded, then wrote something on a notepad and turned it toward her. You're at Steady. Aurelius, you were attacked. You're safe now. She stared at the words. They looked unreal, like subtitles in a dream. Her fingers twitched. She wanted to write back, to say I can't hear you, but her hand shook too much. He seemed to understand anyway. He wrote again, you can't speak yet. Vocal trauma and swelling. We'll help you, later. When the room was quiet again, Nurse Hannah Lee came in. She was young, gentle, with a steady calm that Elise immediately trusted. Hannah adjusted the monitors, checked the four, then noticed Elise watching her. Hey, she said softly. At least, that's what Elise imagined she said. Her mouth moved slowly, kindly. Then she smiled, the kind of smile meant to anchor someone back to the world. Elise tried to return it. It felt weak, mechanical. Hannah wrote on a small whiteboard she carried, You're going to be okay, Dr. Navarro. Elise read it, then shook her head. The nurse hesitated, then added another line. It'll take time. That word had lost meaning inside hospitals. There was only before and after always lasted longer. The next few days passed in fragments. She slept, she woke, she drifted. Sometimes she dreamed of rain. Other times, she dreamed of the voice. Always the same one. You left me there. She would open her eyes to the ceiling lights, pale halos blurring at the edges, and wonder if the voice was real. She started seeing shapes in the corners of the room. Not people, exactly, more like impressions of them. Movement, presence. Sometimes, when she blinked, they vanished. Sometimes they stayed. Aidan visited often. He brought a notebook and spoke through it. Aidan, do you remember the incident? Elise writes shakily, fragments. Aidan, what kind of fragments? Elise, rain, screaming, a light. He nodded, thoughtful. Wrote again. The patient is stable. He's under sedation. Her heart jolted. Elise, he's alive? Aidan, yes. Pause. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, he asked for you before it happened. She froze. Her pulse monitor spiked, flashing its silent alarm. Aidan raised a hand, calming, professional. But his eyes revealed something else. Recognition. Like he'd seen this kind of wound before. That night, Elise lay awake staring at the wall. Rain tapped faintly against the window, not sound, but vibration. She could feel it. She closed her eyes and imagined the world as it must sound. the shuffle of nurses' shoes, the distant hum of machines, the night shift's laughter breaking tension in the break room. She remembered loving those sounds. They meant life. Now, without them, the hospital felt like a tomb. At 2:17 a.m., she slipped out of bed. Her bare feet touched the cold floor. Her head swam, but she pushed forward, moving down the dim corridor, guided by the faint light spilling from under closed doors. She walked past rooms filled with sleeping patients, past empty chairs and discarded gloves, until she reached the psych ward wing. The door to observation was closed, but she could feel it, that same hum she'd heard the night she was attacked. Deeper now, almost alive, her hand hovered over the door handle. She hesitated. Then a voice, soft, familiar. "You shouldn't be here." She turned. Aidan stood at the end of the hallway, half in shadow. He wasn't angry, just watching her, like he understood exactly what she was searching for. He motioned for her to come back. She did, slowly, every step echoing not in sound but in sensation, the memory of footsteps more than the real thing. He walked her back to her room, wrote on the notepad again. "You're not clear to leave bed yet." She nodded. He added, "You remember him, don't you?" She stared at the page for a long time, then took the pen and wrote a single word. No, he didn't look convinced. He closed the notebook, rested it on the table beside her bed, and said something she couldn't hear, but she read his lips. Rest. When he left, she turned toward the window. The rain had stopped again. The world outside looked washed clean. But in the reflection of the glass, for just a second, she saw a man sitting on the chair beside her bed. Not Aidan, not anyone from the staff, someone else. Someone whose face she couldn't remember but whose presence made her throat close. He smiled faintly, then whispered words she couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "You left me there." The fluorescent light flickered once, then again. When it steadied, the chair was empty. Elise lay back slowly, heart hammering in her chest. The silence pressed closer, thicker, not peaceful, not empty, alive. She closed her eyes, and somewhere deep inside the hum of the hospital, a rhythm began to form, not her pulse, not the machine, something older, like the building itself breathing. For the first time, she wondered if silence had a heartbeat too. Hospitals were never truly quiet. Even when everyone slept, something always hummed: the machines, the pipes, the walls themselves. But now, for Elise Navarro, the silence had weight. It pressed against her eardrums, steady as gravity. 3 days had passed since she first saw the man in her room. No one believed her, not out of cruelty, but because they couldn't hear what she could feel. To everyone else, steady, Aurelius was normal. To her, it had begun to breathe. She felt it in the floor when she walked, that faint vibration under her soles, like a heart too big to quiet. Sometimes she thought she heard whispers in the fluorescent buzz. Not words, not voices, but intentions. Dr. Aidan Price came every morning at 6. He carried his small black notebook and wrote questions that looked more like confessions. "Aidan, any pain today?" "Elise, only the kind no one measures." "Aidan, do you remember anything new?" "Elise, yes." The silence has a sound now. He frowned at that, then wrote, "What kind of sound?" She thought for a while, then wrote, "Like a breath through a wall." Or someone listening. He paused longer than usual before replying. "That could be auditory memory." She smiled faintly. "Or the hospital remembering me." Aidan didn't answer. He just closed the notebook slowly, as though afraid to disturb whatever she believed. Nurse Hannah came next. She'd started leaving a small whiteboard on Elise's tray table, drawing small doodles beside the morning vitals. Smiling faces, coffee mugs, a sun, simple things, but they mattered. They tethered Elise to the world that still moved normally. But one morning, when Hannah drew a heart with wings, Elise erased it. She took the marker and wrote underneath, "He's not gone." Hannah frowned, then wrote back, "Who?" Elise hesitated. Her hand trembled as she formed the letters. "The man." "The patient." The nurse looked around the room. Empty chair, clean floor, nothing unusual. She smiled gently, but her eyes didn't match. "You're safe here." Dr. Navarro. Elise nodded, but the silence between them said otherwise. That night, the silence deepened. The rain had stopped for good now, the kind of stop that felt permanent, like the world had turned off a switch. Elise sat awake, tracing the edge of her hospital wristband. Her chart hung from the foot of her bed, neatly labeled, color-coded, clinical. Navarro, Elise Trauma Unit Restricted Activity. The word restricted bothered her. She'd built her life around movement, running between rooms, calling orders, saving lives through motion. Now her body was a cage. She slipped out of bed again. No one stopped her this time. The night shift had grown careless. She looked more ghost than patient. The hallway lights flickered with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Every shadow stretched just a second too long. Every reflection lingered half a blink too late. She walked barefoot past the recovery wing. The floors were cold but polished, reflecting strips of light like veins. A cart creaked down the far end of the corridor, pushed by an orderly she didn't recognize. She waved. The orderly didn't respond, didn't even look up, just kept pushing. The cart wheels left faint streaks of red behind. When Elise blinked, the streaks were gone. The floor was clean again. She reached the observation ward. The same door as before, still locked, still humming softly, a tone that wasn't mechanical but almost human. Her hand hovered above the handle. She didn't know why she kept coming back. Maybe she thought if she could open it, she'd find the missing sound of her voice. Behind her, something flickered in the reflection of the door's small glass window. Movement faint, deliberate. She turned, but the hallway was empty. Then she noticed it, her reflection. It wasn't matching her movements. When she tilted her head, the reflection stayed still, then smiled. Her body went cold. The reflection lifted its hand and traced something invisible in the air, as if writing. Then it whispered. She couldn't hear it, but she felt it vibrate through her bones. You left me there. The lights went out. A hand grabbed her shoulder. She gasped, or thought she did, and spun around. It was Aidan, holding a flashlight, eyes wide with concern. He guided her away from the door, steady but firm. They returned to her room in silence, his real, hers absolute. He didn't write anything at first. He just watched her, studying the tremor in her hands, the distant look in her eyes. Finally, he scribbled on the pad. Why were you there? She hesitated, then wrote, Something called me. Aidan looked down, jaw tightening. He wrote, You're experiencing trauma echoes. It's common. She shook her head violently. It's not memory. It's here. He stared at her, then slowly wrote, What is? Her response came shaky, uneven. The silence. The next morning, Hannah found her still awake. Dark circles under her eyes. The whiteboard on her table was covered in writing, desperate, messy words that seemed half prayer, half record. The silence has color. The walls are breathing. He's in the reflection. The sound is waiting for me. Hannah erased it before anyone else could see. But later, when she looked in the window glass while changing the floor, she saw something move behind her, a shadow standing too close. She turned sharply. Nothing. When she looked back, the reflection was empty again. She didn't tell anyone. By afternoon, Aidan had ordered another scan. He called it precautionary, but his eyes said otherwise. He watched Elise through the glass of the MRI control room, the flickering monitors painting ghost light across her face. Inside the machine, she lay perfectly still, eyes open. The hum of the magnet was faint, rhythmic, almost a lullaby. Then, through the window, Aidan saw something that made his skin crawl. Her hand moved. Not a twitch, deliberate movement. She was writing on the inside of the MRI table. He zoomed the feed in. The letters were jagged, uneven, but clear. He's not in my head. After the scan, Elise looked calmer, detached even. Aidan brought her water. She took it, nodding faintly, her gaze drifting past him to the corner of the room. There, she mouthed. He followed her eyes but saw only the shadow of a curtain, gently swaying in the air vent's current. Still, the hair on his neck stood up. He stepped back, his own pulse matching the rhythm of the flickering light. The silence between them grew thick, the kind of silence that holds breath, that remembers sound. Later that night, Elise found the same whiteboard Hannah had erased. She picked up the marker, hands steady now, wrote a single sentence. If the silence remembers, what happens when it speaks? She stared at it until the marker dried out, then turned off her bedside lamp. For a while, she thought she saw someone standing near the foot of her bed, not a shadow, but a shape filled with stillness. When she blinked, it was gone. The hum of the hospital continued, slow and deliberate. And beneath it, almost imperceptible, came a new sound of faint exhale, as if the building itself had just taken a breath. Morning came late to St. Aurelius. The sun reached the windows reluctantly, filtered through gray clouds that looked like old gauze. Inside, everything remained the same, white, humming, endless. Except for Elise, she had stopped trying to speak, not because she couldn't, but because she no longer trusted what might come out if she did. Her silence wasn't absence anymore. It was something alive. When she closed her eyes, she could hear it pulse, the soft rhythm that lived between her heartbeat and the hum of the hospital. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it listened, and sometimes she thought it mourned. Aidan came in with his usual calm, though his eyes had grown darker, tired from the kind of worry that medicine couldn't fix. He placed his notebook on the tray table, along with a small photograph clipped to a file. He turned the photo toward her. It showed the patient, the man who had attacked her. His name was written in the corner, Nathaniel Brooks. Aidan waited for her to look. She did slowly, carefully, and something deep inside her stirred, a flash of recognition like lightning behind the eyes. Her breath caught, but no memory surfaced, just the echo of fear that didn't belong to this moment. Aidan wrote, "Do you know him?" Elise shook her head, then hesitated. Her fingers brushed the edge of the photo lightly, like she might disturb it. "He said something to you," Aidan wrote. Elise nodded, then reached for the pen. "You left me there," Aidan frowned. "He said that?" She nodded again. He paused, thinking, then wrote, "You never treated him before." Elise looked away. The silence between them deepened, not empty, but heavy, thick as fog. That night, she dreamed of the trauma bay, the crash cart, the lights, the smell of antiseptic and copper. But everything was slowed, like time had been replaced with water. She saw Nathaniel lying on the gurney, his chest rising too fast, his eyes wild. She saw herself standing over him, hands covered in blood, his, maybe hers. She said something, but no sound came out. Then his hand shot up and gripped her wrist, hard. His lips moved. "You left me there." She woke to the soundless scream stuck in her throat. Her hands clutched the sheets, trembling. The clock on the wall read 3:07 am. The same time as the attack. When morning returned, she found Aidan waiting in her room again, not as her doctor this time, but as someone quietly unraveling. He looked different, less composed. His shirt was wrinkled, and his hand shook slightly when he poured coffee into a paper cup. He handed her the notebook. There was no question written this time, only a line, already half faded from pressure. "You can't save everyone." Elise stared at it for a long time, then wrote beneath it, "But we keep trying." He smiled, tired, broken, and nodded. Then he sat down, elbows on his knees, and rubbed his face. She reached for the pen again. "You've lost someone too." He didn't deny it, just leaned back, eyes distant. Finally he wrote, "Afghanistan. A patient. My friend." I froze, their eyes met. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them, the kind of recognition that only two people who've both survived failure can share. That afternoon, Elise was allowed to walk again. Hannah accompanied her through the West Wing, the oldest part of St. Aurelius, where the walls still carried the faint scent of disinfectant and memory. The lights here were dimmer, the air heavier. They passed room 23, long since unused. The plaque was half torn, the glass cloudy. Elise slowed. Her hand brushed the doorframe. A pulse of static ran through her fingertips. Hannah wrote on her board, "Are you okay?" Elise nodded, but didn't move. Something in that room called to her. The silence around it wasn't empty, it waited. A memory flickered, a scream, the sound of breaking glass, the echo of her own breath stopping. She flinched, her throat tightened. The silence deepened and then she heard it again, faint but distinct. "Breathe, Dr. Navarro." Her eyes widened. That voice wasn't Nathaniel's. It was her own echoing back from somewhere inside the walls. She stumbled backward, shaking her head. Hannah reached for her, confused, but when Elise turned again, the door to room 23 was slightly open. Aidan found her sitting on her bed that evening, pale and trembling. He didn't ask what happened, he didn't need to. The monitors around her were flickering with irregular rhythm, as if the machines themselves were nervous. He wrote, "You went to the West Wing." She nodded. "What did you see?" Elise took the pen and wrote slowly. "Me." He frowned. "Your reflection?" She looked up at him, eyes wide. "No, the version of me who stayed." He didn't understand at first, but that night, sitting alone in his office, Aidan opened her file again. He scanned through old notes, past trauma records, past disciplinary reports. And there it was, a name buried in an incident report from 2 years earlier. Nathaniel Brooks, her patient, 2023. Unattended cardiac arrest. DNR missing. Dr. E. Navarro listed as attending physician. Outcome: deceased. He froze. The paper trembled in his hand. She had treated him before, and she had failed. The silence in the room shifted. A small rattle, air vent, maybe, or something else. He looked up. The door to his office was half open. The hallway beyond it was dark, and from the far end came the faint hum, again rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Elise sat alone, the lights dimmed. Her reflection in the window didn't move. It just stared back, eyes full of something like sorrow. She whispered, not aloud, but with every muscle in her face, every vibration in her chest, "I didn't leave you," and from the reflection's lips, without sound, came the reply, "Then why did you stay?" The lamp on her bedside table flickered once, then again, then it stayed on, steady, warm, golden. For the first time since the attack, the silence around her softened. It didn't feel hostile. It felt tired, like it had been holding its breath for too long. Elise lay back against the pillow, eyes closing. Her heartbeat slowed. The hum of the hospital continued its endless song, but beneath it, fainter than before, so faint it might have been imagined, came a whisper that didn't belong to fear anymore. Not all silence is empty. Hospitals are built to forget. Every surface polished, every record filed away, every room cleaned until it no longer remembers who suffered there. But sometimes, if the silence is deep enough, things remember anyway. By the 5th night, Elise had stopped sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the West Wing, the cracked door of room 23, the pale light that leaked from beneath it like breath. She told herself it was just trauma, but the silence disagreed. It waited, patient, rhythmic, alive. Aidan hadn't been sleeping either. The report he'd found about Nathaniel Brooks gnawed at him. The file had been buried, not deleted, a quiet cover-up, the kind done not out of malice, but mercy. According to the chart, the DNR order had been misplaced. The patient should never have been resuscitated. Elise had called it herself, unaware of the missing form. The family had pressed charges, later withdrawn, but the guilt had stayed. It was the kind of error that haunted in silence. Now, 2 years later, Nathaniel Brooks had returned to Stede. Aurelius, under different circumstances. Same name, same eyes, alive, then violent, and now in a coma. Aidan didn't believe in coincidence anymore. He found Elise in the physical therapy wing, standing by the window. The sunrise painted the glass in faded gold, her reflection ghosting against it. He didn't need to ask what she was thinking. He knew. He held up the notebook. "I found the file." Her eyes darkened. "I know," she wrote. "The silence showed me." He frowned. "You mean you remembered?" She shook her head, then wrote, "No, it remembers me." Later that day, Hannah cornered Aidan in the hallway. Her face was pale, her hands trembling around a clipboard. "Dr. Price," she said, voice barely steady, "you should come see this." She led him to the nurse's station in the West Wing. A single monitor was still active, an old patient record terminal that hadn't worked in years. On the screen, black text blinked against gray background. Room 23 occupied. Patient E. Navarro. Aidan's chest tightened. He leaned closer, tapped the keyboard. The screen flickered and for half a second, reflected his own face, and someone else standing behind him. When he turned, the corridor was empty. That night, the three of them, Elise, Aidan, and Hannah, stood outside room 23. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, the silence thick as static. The door hung slightly open, breathing in and out with the rhythm of the air vent. No one spoke, not with sound anyway. They simply looked at one another, three people caught between the living and the remembered. Aidan pushed the door open. The hinges moaned softly, or maybe that was imagination. Inside, the air felt heavier, cooler. The room was dim, its walls cracked beneath old paint. A bed stood in the center, draped in white, as if waiting. Elise stepped forward. Her hand hovered over the sheet. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name: grief, guilt, recognition. Then, faintly, the monitor beside the bed flickered on. No power, no chords, just the soft, pulsing green of a heartbeat. Beep, beep, beep. Except she didn't hear it, she felt it. Inside her ribs, synchronized with her own. Aidan moved closer, eyes wide. "This is impossible," he whispered. Hannah backed toward the door, shaking. "What is this?" Elise touched the monitor screen. The heartbeat quickened, the silence thickened, pressed against the walls like a tide rising. Then, the sound of breathing, faint, labored, real. They all heard it this time. From the bed, Elise pulled back the sheet. The bed was empty. Only the impression of a body remained, outlined faintly in dust. Something shifted, a reflection in the window, a movement that didn't belong to any of them. A man's silhouette, faint and trembling, standing where the patient should be. Nathaniel Brooks. But not as he was. Pallor, translucent, like an afterimage burned into the air. He looked at Elise. His mouth moved, forming the words she already knew. "You left me there." Tears filled her eyes. Her throat convulsed a soundless sob. Aidan stepped forward, instinctively raising a hand between them. But Nathaniel's gaze shifted to him, and Aidan felt it. The cold pressure behind his eyes, the weight of memory not his own. He stumbled back, gasping. Images flooded him: a desert hospital tent, a friend bleeding out under his hands, a voice saying, "You can't save everyone." The room pulsed once, light expanding like breath, and then it was gone. Nathaniel, the heartbeat, the reflection. Only the silence remained. Elise collapsed to her knees, trembling. Aidan caught her before she hit the floor. Her pulse raced under his fingers. He looked at Hannah. "She's crashing." Call code, but he stopped mid-sentence. Because she wasn't. Her heartbeat was steady, her eyes open. Elise looked at him, expression calm, as if she'd finally understood something. She wrote on the floor with her finger, invisible ink traced in dust. "He wasn't haunting me. He was waiting for me to listen." They left room 23 together. Behind them, the monitor flickered once more, then went dark. The silence didn't follow them this time. It stayed, settled, almost at peace. Back in her room, Elise sat on the edge of her bed while Aidan watched from the doorway. She took the notebook and wrote one last sentence. "The silence isn't empty. It's full of everything we couldn't say." Aidan didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because for the first time, she didn't need to read lips to understand. He just nodded and left her there sitting in the quiet, not afraid anymore. But long after midnight, when the hospital had fallen into its usual rhythm of sleepless hum and fluorescent fatigue, the door to room 23 creaked open again. The monitor flickered. One slow, steady pulse appeared on the screen, and somewhere, in the ICU, Nathaniel Brooks exhaled for the first time in days. His eyes opened. The silence began to change its tune. The first sound Elise heard in weeks wasn't a voice. It was the hum of the walls. Low, rhythmic, almost like breath. It vibrated through the floor, the bed frame, her bones, a pulse that didn't belong to her, yet somehow kept her alive. When she opened her eyes, the room was darker than it should have been. Morning light had faded into a dull gold haze. The monitors flickered faintly, though none of them were connected, and across the hallway, through the half-open blinds, she saw a shape still human, watching. For a moment she thought it was Nathaniel again. But the silhouette was wrong, taller, sharper, more familiar. It was her reflection, standing where she wasn't. The same tired posture, the same scars. Except this version of her wasn't breathing. A sudden knock broke the illusion. Aidan stepped inside, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. His expression softened when he saw her sitting upright. He wrote on his pad, "You didn't sleep." Elise shook her head. She took the pen and scribbled, "The silence is moving." He frowned, half amused, half worried. "Moving," he wrote. She pointed at the wall behind her, then pressed her palm flat against it. Aidan followed her gesture, placing his hand beside hers. At first there was nothing, then faint, undeniable, a throb. Slow, rhythmic. Aidan's eyes widened. He pulled his hand away as though burned. "It's the ventilation system," he said aloud, convincing himself more than her. Elise smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. She wrote, "No, it's breathing." Hannah entered moments later, her face pale, clipboard clutched tight. She had come to check vitals but stopped at the doorway, eyes darting between them. "Something's wrong with the monitors," she said. "Every room's showing the same waveform." Aidan frowned. "Same patient?" She nodded. "Same rhythm, same rate, 72 beats per minute." "Exactly." Elise froze. Her silent, steady pulse had always been 72. She grabbed the notebook. "It's sinking." "The hospital is sinking," Aidan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because as they stood there, a soft tremor passed through the floor, not an earthquake, but something alive stretching in its sleep. They followed the tremor down the corridor. The lights flickered with each pulse, like veins illuminated from within. The hum of the machines deepened, blending into something almost melodic. At the intersection between ICU and psych, Hannah stopped. Her eyes widened. "Look!" Every patient monitor along the wall blinked in perfect unison, a wave of green, flowing like breath. No alarms, no beeping, just silence moving through the building like wind through a lung. Aidan whispered, "What is this?" Elise didn't answer. She couldn't, but she felt it, the same vibration that had been growing inside her since the attack, now spilling outward. The silence wasn't absence anymore. It was communication. They reached the observation ward, room 23E's corridor. The air was colder here, the lights dimmer. A shadow of condensation covered the glass walls as if the building were exhaling. Inside room 23, the bed was gone. In its place stood a metal gurney, clean and empty, yet dripping water as if freshly washed. On the floor beneath it, faint footprints leading toward the hallway. "Bare, human," Hannah gasped. "Someone's in here," she whispered. Elise followed the prints. They led to the back wall where the old plaster had begun to crack. Not in lines, but in shapes, arcs, spirals, curves forming patterns like lungs unfurling. She pressed her ear against it, and then she heard it. Not words, not whispers, a rhythm like the ocean echoing from inside stone, a voice without language, a conversation without sound. She pulled back, tears streaming down her face. Aidan caught her, holding her steady. "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough with awe and fear. She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong, and wrote on his palm with her finger. 4 words. "It wants to speak." That night, the hospital changed. The alarms stopped. The pause system went silent. Even the generators seemed to hold their breath. Every hallway shimmered with a faint golden light that didn't come from bulbs or windows. The staff moved slower, speaking softer, like churchgoers entering a sacred place. In her room, Elise sat upright, eyes wide open. The air was thick with quiet. Each inhale felt shared, like the hospital was breathing with her. Then, faintly, a new sound broke through. A voice. It came not from outside her, but from deep within the silence itself. A voice that wasn't Nathaniel's or her own, but something older, encompassing both. "You listened." Elise's throat tightened. Her lips parted. A single sound escaped, cracked, rough, fragile. "Why, yes," her first word in weeks. Aidan, who had been dozing in the chair, jolted awake. He turned to her, eyes wide. Elise, she met his gaze. A tear slipped down her cheek. Her voice trembled again, almost lost to the quiet. It remembers us. Aidan didn't sleep after that. He walked the halls in the half-light, tracing his fingers along the walls, feeling that same rhythm in every step. He reached the basement, a place most of the staff avoided after dark. Old records, maintenance rooms, disused wards, and something else. A mural, hidden behind years of peeling paint. He brushed the dust away and saw it, a faint outline of lungs, etched into the plaster. But the arteries weren't human, they were corridors. The hospital's layout, its blueprints drawn like a body, each hallway a vein, each room a breath. Aidan stepped back, dizzy. Above the mural, half-erased words still remained. The hospital is built to heal itself. Back upstairs, Elise stood by the window, watching the dawn rise over the city. The world outside was quiet. For once, she didn't feel afraid of the silence. In the reflection, her other self stood beside her again, the quiet version, the one who had stayed. But this time, she didn't turn away. They looked at each other for a long moment. It was never him you left behind, the reflection mouthed. It was yourself. Elise reached toward the glass. Her fingers met their mirror image. For the first time, the reflection moved in sync. The walls around her pulsed one last time, a breath drawn in, held and released. The hum faded. The silence became true silence. And somewhere deep inside the building, a final whisper echoed, calm, satisfied, eternal. Now we can rest. Hospitals are built on stories. Walls layered over walls, bricks pressed against memories. Every renovation covers another heartbeat, another failure, another name that was whispered once and then never again. But some stories don't stay buried. They settle into the foundation. They hum, they breathe. And if you listen long enough, they start to speak back. The morning after the hospital breathed, Aidan Price didn't go home. He couldn't. He'd spent the night walking the lower levels, following the mural of lungs he'd uncovered in the basement. The deeper he went, the stranger it became. Tunnels that weren't on any blueprint, halls that curved in ways geometry shouldn't allow. It was as if the building had grown on its own, like scar tissue forming around memory. He carried his flashlight in one hand and Elise's notebook in the other. She had written something on the last page before she fell asleep. If the hospital heals, what happens to what it takes? He didn't know, but he intended to find out. The tunnels led him to an old service corridor sealed behind a heavy iron door. The air down there smelled of dust and metal, like the breath of something old and patient. He pried it open. Inside, the walls were lined with archival cabinets, hundreds of them, stretching into the dark. He opened one. Inside, rows of glass jars, each filled with yellowing paper, names, diagnoses, times of death, records from decades past. Some were labeled, some weren't, and among them, he found something that made his pulse quicken. File 07B23, E. Navarro. But it wasn't her current record. The paper was dated to years before she'd ever started at STD. Aurelius, handwritten, faded. The top of the sheet read, Experimental Admission Neural Trauma Program. Subject survived. Data retained. Aidan sat back, the weight of realization settling over him. Elise hadn't just worked at STT. Aurelius, she had been part of it. Somewhere above him, he heard a low groan, not mechanical, but organic, like a building exhaling in its sleep. Dust fell from the ceiling in soft waves. He grabbed another file, then another. Everyone told the same story. Doctors, nurses, patients, all tied to the hospital long after their bodies had left it. The foundation wasn't just concrete, it was memory, and it had been fed for years. Upstairs, Elise woke to the sound of the rain returning, soft at first, then heavier, until it swallowed the city outside. The storm that had begun the night of her attack had come back to finish what it started. She rose slowly, her legs trembling but steady. Her reflection waited in the window again, no longer fractured, no longer still. This time, it smiled. He knows, it mouthed. She nodded once, then whispered, barely audible, "I'm ready." The silence around her shifted gentler now, guiding her instead of holding her back. Aidan emerged from the basement hours later, carrying a single folder. The paper inside was damp from his hands, the ink beginning to bleed. He found Elise in the main atrium, standing beneath the skylight as rain dripped down the glass. She turned before he could speak, as if she'd been waiting. He held out the file. Her name stared back at her. She didn't flinch, just traced the letters with her fingertips. He spoke softly. "You were part of an experimental program here. Neural trauma recovery. They were trying to map how memory reacts to sound deprivation." She blinked slowly, the weight of it not surprising her, only confirming something she'd already felt. "They used sensory isolation," he continued. "You volunteered. After that, the hospital changed. They said it began to absorb patient feedback, emotional resonance like an echo chamber for grief." He hesitated. "They built the new trauma wing right over the test chambers." Elise's lips trembled. She whispered, "That's why I could hear it." Thunder cracked above them, echoing through the halls like a heartbeat too big for its cage. The lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the hospital, alarms tried to start but failed. Hannah ran in from the far corridor, soaked and pale. "I see you just lost power," she said. "The generators won't start." Aidan turned, scanning the flickering lights. "It's pulling from itself," he murmured. "The hospital's trying to." He stopped, because he didn't know how to finish the sentence. Elise did. "It's healing." They moved toward the ICU, the storm raging outside and the silence growing stronger within. Every step felt like moving through water, heavy, dense, charged. The walls trembled softly, the same rhythm Elise had felt beneath her fingers. As they entered the ICU, monitors blinked erratically, lights fading in waves. Every patient lay still, peaceful. No alarms, no pain, just quiet. Elise placed a hand on one of the monitors. Its pulse matched hers. Aidan stared, realization dawning. "The hospital's not killing them," he said softly. "It's taking their pain." She nodded. "It always has." He turned to her. "But if it's healing them, where does it go?" Elise met his eyes. Her voice came out barely a whisper, each syllable trembling like a secret too long buried. "Into us." At that moment, every monitor in the ICU spiked. Lines of green shot upward, then flattened in unison. The lights went out. For a breathless second, there was nothing. Then the hum returned, not loud, not menacing, gentle. The walls shimmered faintly under the emergency lights, like skin under a pulse. When the power came back, everything was calm again. Patients stable, machines normal. But something had shifted, an aftertaste of warmth in the air, like the residue of life returning where death had hovered. Aidan turned to Elise. She stood still, eyes closed, breathing in rhythm with the hospital. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. Her voice was steady now, quiet but sure. It remembered what to be. Aidan looked at her, exhausted, awed. "Then what are we now?" She opened her eyes. Rain streaked the glass behind her, blurring the city into watercolor light. The ones who listened, that night, when the storm finally broke, the silence of St. Aurelius changed forever. It wasn't empty anymore. It carried whispers, soft, grateful, human, not haunting, remembering. And in the lowest level, where the foundation met the earth, the mural of lungs glowed faintly, veins pulsing with dim golden light, breathing not with air, but with memory. For the first time in years, St. Aurelius was silent, not because it was empty, but because it was listening. Every vent, every pipe, every flicker of light seemed to hold its breath. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The air that replaced it was different, softer, washed clean. Elise sat alone in the chapel, a small forgotten space at the center of the hospital's oldest wing. The stained glass cast slow-moving colors over the pews, turning dust into constellations. She hadn't prayed in years, but this morning, she didn't need words. She only needed to be heard. Aidan stood outside the door, watching her through the narrow window. He didn't want to disturb her, but the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of everything they'd survived. He still had her notebook in his coat pocket. The last page was blank, except for one small sentence written in her steady, slanted hand. When sound returns, remember to listen. He didn't yet know what it meant, but he could feel it the way one feels an echo long before hearing it. The hospital had changed. Staff walked more gently now. The usual rush of stretchers and chatter had been replaced by a kind of reverence. Even the machines seemed quieter, as if calibrated to something human rather than mechanical. And yet, beneath that calm, something stirred. The hum had not vanished. It had deepened, no longer a pulse of pain, but a heartbeat of memory. Hannah had noticed it too. She found Aidan by the nurse's station, flipping through old blueprints. "Are we supposed to pretend this didn't happen?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "No one would believe us anyway," she exhaled, relieved and uneasy all at once. "You think it's over?" He looked toward the chapel. "No, I think it's waiting." Inside, Elise opened her eyes. She felt the weight of everything the hospital had taken: screams, sobs, prayers whispered in sterile rooms, all of it held gently in the silence. But something was missing, something that kept the stillness from becoming peace. She stood and walked toward the altar, her bare feet echoing softly on the old tile. Each step resonated a small vibration through the floor, into the walls, through the veins of the building itself. And somewhere deep below, the hospital responded. The lights dimmed. The hum grew faintly stronger, pulsing in rhythm with her steps. Elise paused. She closed her eyes, pressed a hand to her chest, and whispered, not with fear, but with understanding. "You can't keep it forever." The silence shivered, like a held breath. The air itself seemed to wait for what would come next. Aidan felt the tremor before he saw it. The hallway lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, glowing warmer than before. The air smelled faintly of rain again, but sweeter, almost like spring. He ran toward the chapel, the hum following him, alive and resonant. When he burst through the door, Elise stood at the center of the room, surrounded by swirling dust illuminated by colored light. Her eyes were open, her expression calm. For a second, she looked translucent, not vanishing, but merging with the air around her. "Elise," he called out, his voice breaking through the silence. She turned to him slowly, smiling faintly. "I remember," she said, and it was clear, unbroken, strong. Her first full sentence, her last. Then the sound began. It started small, a low vibration, like the hospital exhaling for the first time. Then came the echoes, distant, layered voices overlapping in gentle waves. Not cries, not pain, but words, thousands of them, every unspoken thing the hospital had carried for years. They filled the halls like light through a stained glass window. Voices of the lost, the healed, the grieving, all of them whispering gratitude. The foundation rumbled softly, but not in anger. The walls glowed faintly, veins of gold tracing through cracks like healing scars. Aidan fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of it, not fear, but awe. He looked up at Elise. She was still there, standing beneath the colored glass, eyes closed, arms open. The sound flowed through her, not consuming, but releasing. And then, as quickly as it had risen, it began to fade. When the last echo dissolved, the hum was gone. The quiet that followed wasn't hollow anymore. It was alive. Elise stood motionless. Her skin glowed faintly in the morning light, her outline soft, as though the air itself was learning to hold her shape. Aidan stepped forward, his throat tight. "Elise," she opened her eyes. For a moment, he saw the same calm he'd seen in room 23, the peace that comes after surrender. Then she smiled. "It's done." And just like that, the light dimmed. She was gone. In the weeks that followed, steady, Aurelius returned to its rhythm. New patients arrived, old ones went home. The storm passed, but the silence never sounded the same again. Aidan kept working, not out of duty, but because the quiet now carried her voice. Sometimes, late at night, when the hospital had settled into its usual nocturnal hum, he would sit in the chapel and listen. Every now and then, he swore he could hear her laugh, faint, like a breath caught in memory. Hannah once found him there and asked, "Do you ever miss her?" He smiled, eyes distant. "She's still here." Months later, the city approved renovations to the old West Wing. When construction crews broke through the basement wall, they found something embedded in the plaster, a mural of lungs, faintly glowing beneath layers of dust. At its center was a small inscription, barely legible but carved deep. "When sound returns, remember to listen." The workers thought it poetic graffiti, but those who spent enough time in that wing swore they sometimes heard a heartbeat echoing softly through the vents, not mechanical, not ghostly, just human. One night, long after the last shift had ended, a janitor walking past the chapel heard faint humming. He peeked inside. The pews were empty, but the air shimmered slightly, dust suspended in golden light, moving to the rhythm of a slow, familiar melody. He smiled without knowing why, whispered a quiet amen, and kept walking. Behind him, the silence of Stiti. Aurelius breathed once more, not haunted, not burdened, alive.